some reason, the iPad just switched itself off in mid-flow. Um, it's not a problem I have getting back to where I was. So I just begun to start talking about TV. The Walking Dead is still very much at the centre of things. I don't want to give any spoilers, so I'm going to be very careful about what I say. But for anyone who has seen it, I would just say The Mouth of Sauron. And hopefully you'll understand what I mean. There's a significant moment in the middle of the episode. It's probably the significant moment of the episode in many ways. And when I was reading The Lord of the Rings as a teenager and in my 20s and also in my 30s, I've read it several times, that was what I imagined The Mouth of Sauron to be. I don't want to... I loved the films. The films were fantastic. I really, really enjoyed them. Sorry, I've got myself a glass of wine now. I really, really enjoyed the films. And Peter Jackson and Pippa and his wife did a fantastic job adapting the films. You could not film the books. The books are written as a book, and I would have thought it would be virtually impossible to endure watching what happens in the books as a film, because it doesn't have the same narrative structure at all. And they had to make a decision, and they chose to make the story about Frodo, to focus on his aspect of the story, and everything else that happened had to, in some way, play back into Frodo's story, which is fine. It's a perfectly acceptable way of adapting The Lord of the Rings. The only problem with it, of course, is the third book in Lord of the Rings, and it's not a trilogy by any stretch of the imagination, and if you read the book you'll know it's not a trilogy. It's 3 volumes of the same book. But the third volume is called The Return of the King. And if you don't make it about Aragorn, then you're not faithfully reproducing the significant climax of the film. And having listened to the commentaries, clearly the filmmakers understood that themselves, and they worked within the limitations of what was possible within their art. And I think, to some extent, having had the climactic battle of Pelennor Fields, they really didn't have anywhere to go with Aragorn and the other characters. They march on the Black Gates. They have this confrontation with the dark powers of Mordor as a distraction, which it is a distraction to keep the eye away from Frodo as he traverses to the Crack of Doom. The problem is, I think they've kind of run out of steam almost, and in some ways, perhaps Tolkien himself was running out of steam at this point, or on this particular area, because he doesn't really go into much detail about the Mouth of Sauron, and it's clear that, from the commentary in particular, that they were really struggling with how to make this character come alive on the screen. And I thought they did a good job. I'm not going to denigrate the job. It was strange enough and horrible enough and twisted enough to be a reflection of the Dark Lord in his tower and the twisted nature of his spirit. But had this episode of The Walking Dead been aired 20 years ago, this is the character that they would have had to the nth degree that the film would have allowed, is all I'm saying. It's a brilliant character, it's a brilliant episode. I love the whole... I don't want to go into any detail, but I love the fact that every time we come across new communities of people, it's different enough to be identifiable, and that their difference is not arbitrary. There is a good storytelling underpinning for the reason for their society being a different society from all the other societies we've actually come across. It's one of the strengths of The Walking Dead. I know gothic horror fans dismiss it as a soap opera with zombies, and they're not wrong. In many ways it is. I would say it's a better drama than simply soap opera, but it is a drama with zombies rather than a zombie fest with a bit of plot thrown in for good measure. And I don't think The Walking Dead should be embarrassed about being that particular combination. I'd far rather have a strong plot than all the gothic horror that you can imagine, and the Grand Guignol and all that kind of blood and gore and high drama. Those things have a place, but it would be very wearing 16 weeks in a year to have that kind of exposition going on. So, anyway, I love The Walking Dead. I've mentioned it many, many times. I'm not going to recommend any other TV this week because I haven't actually watched any other TV, except I will say football. And by football, I do mean association rules football. Soccer is perfectly acceptable to call it soccer. But I would just say that rugby union, rugby league, American football, Gaelic football, Aussie rules football, only association rules football actually requires the foot to be used as the primary means of propelling the ball rather than picking it up and running with it or throwing it backwards. That's all I've got to say on the matter. However, tomorrow is the English Football League Cup final, Manchester United against Southampton. I'm a Manchester United fan, so obviously I'll be watching that. We are having a reasonable run of results at the moment, so this is the first silverware of the season since the Community Shield, which we also won. So, yeah, hoping that we do well tomorrow. So, books. Wednesday this week, 1st of March, is the first day of Lent. It's Ash Wednesday. And so, as is my practice at this time of year, from my monastic days as much as anything else, I will be having a particular book to read. And the one I've chosen this year is a book that was actually published about 20 years ago. I wonder if I will have the date of publication here, though I've not got my glasses on, so I might not be able to see it. It is... when was this? Sorry, just turn it to the light. It was 1992, so it's actually 25 years ago. Gosh, is it that long? I hadn't realised it was such a long time ago. Anyway, this is a book by Henri Nouwen, who is a theologian and spiritual writer, concerning a book... concerning his reaction to a famous painting by Rembrandt, The Return of the Prodigal Son. I'm just looking inside. That's the actual full painting, whereas the cover only gives the detail of the father and the son. And it's a spiritual reflection on both the painting and on the gospel story that underpins it. And it's a very, as I recall, this book was read out in the monastery. During meal times we don't have speaking, but one of the monks reads to all the other monks while they eat. So we start with a passage from Scripture, and then when the meal starts, we have a book read. And during Lent and Advent, it tends to be a book with a religious theme. And this book was one that was chosen for, I think this was the Holy Week and Easter Week book. And it's a very good book. It's written from he reflects upon all the characters who appear in the painting as if he were that character, and understands their motivations and their feelings and their spiritual identities. And it's well worth. It's a good book, and I'll give you the full there. It's Henri Nouwen, The Return of the Prodigal Son, A Story of Homecoming. So I'll be reading that, and I can recommend it. It is a very good book. So obviously it's Lent, and it's the norm. Everyone always says, "What are you giving up for Lent this year? What are you giving up for Lent?" Well, one of the things I do give up is during the period of Lent, I don't drink, except on Sundays. Sundays are of Lent, but not in Lent. It's a very careful distinction. There are 40 days of fasting to represent the 40 days of fasting in the desert. So there are 6 weeks and 3 days of Lent. Well, if you add that up, 4 days. So there's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday of this coming week. So Ash Wednesday, Ash Thursday, Ash Friday, Ash Saturday, if you like. And then there are 6 weeks, or 5 weeks of Lent and Holy Week. And 6 weeks of 7 days is 42, plus these other 4 is 46. So they're not 40 days in Lent. So if you take the Sundays out of Lent, so they're of Lent but not in Lent, you end up with 40 days in the desert. Because the Christian idea is that Sunday is the special day of remembrance of the resurrection of the Lord, and you can't fast on a feast day, which I think is... So it's the long-winded way of saying that we treat, as we were taught as children, to treat Sundays of Lent as oases in the desert. So I give up drinking, but I can have a drink on a Sunday if I really want one. I tend not to drink, but anyway, that's just one of those things. But there are 3 elements of spiritual practice in the Bible, which is fasting, giving something up, almsgiving, and prayer. And it's an important aspect of my everyday life, and always has been. From being a very young child, we always prayed together as a family. We always went to church on Sundays. I was in a monastery for 12 years, so prayer is an integral part of my daily life. And the prayer at church, the Divine Office, on there, all ready to go for on Wednesday. I've got my other one on the bedside cabinet for the rest of this week. So and almsgiving. So my church here in Abingdon, and I'm guessing this is a diocesan, Portsmouth diocesan thing that I've not checked yet, is promoting something called, let me just get this right, it's called Live Simply. And the idea is that we, in the modern world, we'd be play acting if we pretended to be poor. Most of us, fortunately, have no idea about the back-breaking, stomach-aching poverty of some of our brothers and sisters in the world today, and certainly of our forebears. We would be doing them a disservice to pretend that we can even come close to experiencing their lives. I'm sitting on a sofa in my bedroom. I've got 2 other sofas, a sofa and 2 other chairs in the sitting room. I've got a lovely big bed all to myself. I have a TV, computer, an iPad. I've got lights, I've got heating, I've got carpets, I've got walls, I've got doors, I've got windows. You know, that's just, and we consider those to be the basics of life. So we really would be play acting if we pretended to be poor. But we can still share some solidarity with our brothers and sisters who live in poverty by not always having as much as we could have. Not to say that anything that we do have is bad, but just choosing not to have the extra stuff, choosing not to make life that little bit more comfortable. Having it comfortably enough is enough. Enough rather than too much. Enough rather than just more and more and more and more. And I'm aware I'm saying that with a bookcase here full of books and a hallway full of bookcases stuffed full of books and you know, and yarn sitting in plastic boxes waiting to be used. And we're all guilty of having more than we actually need because we can have it, and why should we deny ourselves if we can have it? It's, you know, it's there, it's available. It's not going to change anything if we have it or don't have it, so why not have it? And Lent is a time for taking stock. When we were in the monastery, this is all connected, by the way. I know it sounds random, but it will all come together. In the monastery, every Lent, we had to complete what we called a poverty bill, which we had to list everything that we had the exclusive use of. So that would include your bed, your desk, your chair, the wash basin, your toothbrush, the books on your shelves. Because even though one of the important things, when you ask people what vows does a monk take, they always say poverty, chastity, obedience. Well, those are the evangelical vows that have been taken by all religious from orders that have been founded since the 13th century. the Franciscans being the most famous, of course, and the Dominicans, but all the orders of nuns, the Carmelites, the Poor Clares, all of these as well take the evangelical vows. But a Benedictine monk, the origin of the Benedictines goes back to the 5th century, they don't take those vows. They take vows of obedience, stability, and conversion of life. Obedience to the abbot as the lawful authority in the monastery. Stability to that community. So the monastery you join is the monastery where you live and die, effectively, unless that monastery sends you off to another monastery to help found a new place or for your studies or whatever. But generally speaking, once you go to that place, you are there. And the conversion of life, conversatio morum, and we don't actually translate it, it is conversatio morum, but the translation is approximately conversion of life. You adopt the life of the community that you've joined, and you convert your life more and more to the life of that is the paradigm of the community, which is supposed to be the more Christian life. And the point of reference here would be the post-resurrection community in the Acts of the Apostles, where it's almost socialist, but it's more communitarian than communist, if you like, where each gives according to their ability to give, and each takes according to their needs. So you gave what you had, but you only took what you needed, which meant that there was enough for everybody. So the poor who weren't able to give as much still got what they needed to live their daily life, whereas the rich who had more to give gave more and took back less, but they still took back enough that they needed to live their daily life. So nobody was worse off than anybody else, even though some gave more than others. And, you know, our progressive tax system is based on a very similar idea. When it works properly, anyway. So in the monastery, you don't actually own any of the things in your room. So technically, it's ad usum, it's for the use of. But in reality, if it's on your shelf, it's not available to somebody else because nobody else goes into your room. If it's not your book, then put it in the library. Only take from the library a book you need and put it back in the library where other people can then take it. But we don't do that. We have our lovely books on our lovely shelves where we can look at them and we can touch them and we can pick them up and open them, but they're not available to other people. And if somebody knew they were there and asked for them, then you say, oh yes, I've got that, you can have that. But there's still that kind of possessiveness. They're my books on my shelf in my room. Well, the poverty list is a way of addressing that. First, you yourself, because it's amazing how much stuff you have. And you have, once you start listing things, I mean, anyone who's moved house knows this. You open a drawer and, it's a little drawer. All you can see is the front of the drawer. It's a single item. You open the drawer and there are 200 things in the drawer, or 50 things, depending upon the size of the thing and the size of the drawer. And you look at a shelf of books and you think, well, it's just a shelf, but, there's possibly 100 books on this shelf in various ways. And it's only by listing them that you begin to realise just how much stuff you actually have. And the Latin word for things, for furniture and furnishings, is impedimenta, things that you stumble over. And to some extent that's true. When you have things, you're tied to the place where the thing is. You don't want to lose the thing, you want to hold on to the thing. So, anyway, the first part of the process is to write the list, the poverty list. The second part is to decide what you actually don't need. And one good rule of thumb is, have you looked at this book, in the last 12 months? And if you haven't, put it in the library, because somebody else might need it. Not want it, but need it. And that's a very good rule of thumb as well. What if you're not actually used in the last 4 years? Do you need this thing that you found at the bottom of the cupboard that you haven't seen since you put it there 6 years ago? It's a very good question. What about those clothes that maybe one day you'll lose enough weight to get back into, but actually you never will? Well, what are they doing hanging in your wardrobe? Get rid of them. Give them to somebody who needs them. You don't need them. You don't want them. Anyway. So, one of the things about living simply this Lent, is that I have decided that apart from milk and bread and fresh fruits and vegetables, I will not be buying any more food until Easter. And that isn't to say that I am in any way, shape or form going to go hungry. I have more than enough food in my cupboards, in the fridge and in the freezer to last me easily through 6.5 weeks of Lent. And it means that everything that's in there I've bought. So at some point I thought, oh, that looks nice, I might try that. Somebody asked me, and I know you watch this podcast, and this is the answer in a way, well, what if you don't fancy it? Well, that's part of the discipline of the asceticism, if you like, of Lent, is it's good for me. It's perfectly edible food. I, at some level, quite like the idea of it because I wouldn't have bought it if I didn't. So if there's nothing wrong with it and I quite like the idea of it, then the fact at this moment in time I don't feel like it, well, tough, eat it, that's what's there. Eat what you're given. As children, most of us have heard those words, eat what you're given. There are people in the world who are starving who would be glad for this food. And that's actually, it's banal on one hand, but it's actually profoundly true on another hand. There are literally people starving to death in this world of ours who would be grateful for one morsel of that food. So eat it, and eat it with that thought in your mind. Eat it with the thankfulness that you're not starving. And the second part of the trilogy, the three pillars, the fasting and the prayer are the two pillars. The third pillar, the second part, because I said fasting, almsgiving and prayer, the almsgiving. It's traditional in Lent for a family fast day to be held. And so you just have a snack-sized midday meal. And the money that you save, and you don't have treats and things in between meals, and the money that you save goes to CAFOD, which is the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, which is a... Sorry, there seems to be an issue with the storage in my iPad. There's plenty of room, but it seems to want to cut me off every so often. Anyway, I think we're now set to go. I'm not going to be too heavy. So I was talking about the Family Fast Day, CAFOD. The Catholic Agency for Overseas Development is a charity set up for international development purposes by the Catholic Church in England and Wales. The recipients of the aid, be it projects for clean water in villages or emergency famine relief and flood relief and that kind of activity, the recipients can be people of any religion or culture. What makes it Catholic is that it is an agency of the Catholic Church, and that the people who donate to it are usually Catholic, and that the people who work for the agency themselves have an understanding of Catholic ethos and identity and culture. So it is, although it is a religious organisation, it is non-partisan in the way in which it assists people. And I'm a regular giver to CAFOD. It's one of my charities. So the money that is saved by not having as much to eat on a particular day, usually a Friday in Lent, is then donated by the family to CAFOD for them to carry out their work with other families overseas. So I'm intending, as part of my Lenten observance, that the money that I save by not buying more food than I've already got, frankly more food than I could actually eat easily in any reasonable time, that money will be going to CAFOD. And I think that's perhaps is a good example of how we can integrate who we are with the world around us, and not just be doing something for my benefit. And there is a benefit to me. I'm going to probably eat better, in that I'm going to have to plan meals. I'm going to have to not just follow a whim or a fancy, but actually have proper coordinated meals. I'm not going to be able to buy food for lunch, so I'm going to have to prepare food the day before or the morning to take into work with me. So, there are benefits to me. I've got a lot of pulses in my cupboard. I always intend to eat more healthily than I actually often end up eating. So this is actually going to be the stimulus, because I'm going to have to eat these things. And I love them. There's no issue with eating them. I bought them because I like them, but I just haven't kind of had the gumption to do anything with them. So it's there's a lot of positive for me, but at the same time, I'm also going to be helping others. So it's a good way of preparation for Easter, and I can thoroughly recommend it as a way to prepare yourself, or even just to. I mean, this is banal in one way, but just to have a spring clean of the cupboards. There are probably things in there that I've had in there for far too long, and in a world where people are starving to death, it is sinful, or simply wrong, however you want to express it, to have food that you're not eating just because you don't feel like that food. It just seems to me that there is more that I can do as an individual to be more aware of me and my effect on the world around me. We all talk about carbon footprints, and that's an important aspect as well. And I'm doing it from a religious motivation, but these are things that can be done for a whole host of environmental or political or social reasons as well. And they're not mutually exclusive. You can do it for all of those reasons. You can be religious and political and social and environmental. This is not an either-or situation. This is very much a both-and. So that's my motivation, but what I'm doing. So, if I've given you any food for thought, then I'm happy. I don't want to be heavy. This is not a heavy podcast. I'm not preaching to anybody. But this is a part of who I am and, how I can be better as a person. And if me sharing it helps you with your thoughts about how you can be better as a person, then, that's all to the good. And if it means absolutely nothing to you, then you can just skip over this bit and pretend it never happened. So I think my iPod keeps telling me that it's running out of memory, although it isn't. So perhaps it thinks I've been whittering on for far too long. So I think that's everything I have to talk about today. Except, and this is going back to the points I've just been talking about, I got as far as making it into a cake. This is that lovely oak tweed fisherman's wool. Smells delicious. Feels fantastic. I haven't actually cast on the project yet, that I'm not telling you what it is, so I'm not being deliberately evasive. I haven't yet cast it on, so because the corner-to-corner blanket took the priority after I received the request, because helping somebody else is always a priority over helping yourself, or should be. So I will get round to this. During Lent, I will make it one of my Lenten observances, if you like, to get on with this. It's such a beautiful piece of wool. It really is so lovely to feel. I just wish that you could hold this yourself. It is so, so lovely. And this oak tweed, it's such a beautiful colour. I can't wait to get this done. So as soon as I have started it, I'll let you know what I'm doing. But I'm not going to let you know what I'm doing until I've started it. I've got as far as caking it up. Anyway, I'll leave that there. So yes, that is everything for today. Thank you for sticking with me. I know I've gone through an awful lot of stuff, but I find this an interesting experience, sharing thoughts about myself. I would never say that I was that kind of confident person. But I am surprised how confidently and comfortable I feel. How confidently I talk about things that matter to me, and share them with you. I know most of the people who are watching this on a regular basis. And I'm just glad to have you as friends. So until next time, I'll say cheers.